Hey everyone, thank you for joining. Um, the recording for the space has for this community call has started. Armando, I'll bring you up to speak. I'd like to say to everyone present before the call, before we start to discuss the details of this call, anyone who would like to speak, and Brianna, you've been a particularly active community member in the past few weeks. So if you or anyone else would like to speak, you're more than invited to raise your hand and speak. In the past couple of weeks, two items have been shared with the Sovryn team. One is the checker report created and shared by Armando, and the other is a SIP proposed by Iago that ratifies the decision to divert funds from Sovryn to the exchequer rather than dispersing it to the stakers. And I will let Iago explain it and discuss it. Iago, when the stage is yours.
I think it would be much more useful in terms of context if Armando first review the financial.
Okay, happy to. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to do totally fairly quick overview of the financial report, which was recently shared in the forum. This report covers the period of Q4 2024, Q1 to Q4 2025, so a period of 15 months since the previous update was shared. As a summary, the treasury balance as of Q3 2024 was 4.84 million, split relatively evenly between stablecoin assets and other crypto assets, primarily Bitcoin and other assets such as ETH and BNB, primarily for the provision of liquidity to the different systems running the Sovryn platform. One thing to take into account that this treasury balance does not include any SOV assets held by Exchequer. At the end of that period of Q3 2024, and based on the run rate for the project at the time, it was estimated that there would be an additional 16 months of runway based on the treasury balance and the spend patterns at that time. During the period up until the end of 2025 and including up until the end of Q3 2026, Exchequer did not realize any revenue from the system or any incoming capital from token sales or investments. Over that period, the spend came to a total of 4.1 million. And one of the goals that is a receipt proposed by Iago, posted to a failing, is to start diverting protocol revenue to the Exchequer, and at the same time to drastically lower the protocol burn in order to provide a more stable treasury and allow the project to hopefully replenish its treasury over time. Looking a little bit into the details, over the course of the last 15 months, up until the end of 2025, over half the expenses were focused on development. So that's maintenance of all of the system that the Circle protocol runs, all headcount related to development, all third parties that were developing parts of the system, the bug bounty program, and any infrastructure related to maintaining and running the project. On the operations side, those expenses are primarily related to administrative costs, ancillary costs such as legal expenses, and anything related or not directly related to development work, but around maintaining the project and the project team. And the last cost is adoption, which is primarily related to any marketing efforts, but more than that, to the headcount related to support for the system, and any infrastructure or subscription costs, and systems that are related to not only marketing, but providing support. We can see that mix that existed prior to Q4 2024 has mostly not changed. There were increases in adoption costs related to an increase in support costs, and to some delayed expenses that were delayed from 2024. If we look at the expenses per quarter, we can see that at the end of Q4 2024, there was still a relatively high run rate, which was in line with what was presented in the previous financial report, and also the number upon which the 16-month runway was calculated. And a process of a reduction in costs over the course of 2025 was started, and on average costs were lowered over the period of 2025. And at the same time, there was still quite a lot of costs related to development, and those were around Sovryn layer, the origins protocol, costs related to third-party development, and along with the financial report in the foreign also specified a few instances where not only in adoption but also in development, some costs were deferred and occurred primarily in Q4 rather than spread out over the whole year. And so that brings us to an average monthly burn over the course of this period, over these 24 months, about $274,000 per month. Where the plan moving forward, which has already been implemented since November of last year, is to bring down the average monthly burn drastically by approximately 80%, bringing it down to anywhere between $40,000 to $50,000 per month. This was done through a few efforts. One was lowering the headcount of the Sovryn protocol lowering across the board in development, operations, and adoption. This was also brought about by stopping a lot of the ongoing development efforts and maintaining primarily only maintenance of current services that are running. The total treasury remaining at the end of Q4 2025 was $730,000. And at the close of this month, the treasury balance will be approximately $400,000. The $40,000 to $50,000 monthly burn rate is calculated primarily based on Sovryn's average revenue over the last 5 years, which comes to approximately $530,000 per year, bringing the monthly revenue to approximately $45,000. The hope is that if these revenues are diverted to the treasury, along with the buffer that the current treasury has, and the reduction in costs, assuming that protocol revenue does not drastically decrease, over time we'll be able to maintain the protocol as it is and hopefully replenish the treasury to bring it to a more healthier position. I've covered this. So those are the main points. There's a little bit more detail in the post on the forum that accompanied this report. And yes, happy to take questions during this call.
Thank you, Armando. I will say a few words and look to answer some questions that are already coming up and have previously been expressed. So the SIP that I'm proposing, the goal of the SIP that I published is to ratify the decision that was made by Exchequer. And the reason it was published when it was published is because we needed to complete the work to have a budget that we could present, because that is critical context for what we are discussing here. So before I get into the SIP, let's discuss the context. There is not much of a decision to be made here. The decision is made by mathematics. There is X amount of capital. That capital is required in order to maintain the safety, security, and continued indefinite functioning of the Sovryn protocol. All of us have exactly the same goal, which is the number one priority is that Sovryn continue to function safely and reliably into the future, perhaps forever, as a DeFi platform that people can utilize and use their Bitcoin with. Everything else is secondary to that. The value of SOV staking is secondary to that, because without that, there is no revenue. There is no SOV staking. The value of SOV is secondary to that, because without that, there is no SOV. The ability to launch the Sovryn layer is secondary to that, because if the protocol is not functioning and not functional, there's not going to be an ability to launch the Sovryn layer. The ability to have the kind of team that we want is secondary to that. Everything is secondary to that. So we have a situation where there is a cost which is unavoidable in order to maintain the safety and security of the system. And that cost needs to be paid, needs to be covered. And the only way that that cost can be covered indefinitely into the future is through protocol revenue. The capital that was raised in the past is limited, and it is drawn down over time. It has been drawn down over time. And that is simply a mathematical inevitability unless revenues can be redirected to exchange. And so in practice, there was no decision to be made here. This was a requirement of reality. That said, it is a very frustrating requirement because it's not like we are in a position where we can take part of the revenue and redirect it at this point in time in order to properly replenish and completely cover both the costs and the necessity to add funds to the exchequer. We, for a period of time, need to redirect everything. So the question that I want to answer now is, if that is the case, why? And I think I'm going to answer a question which, unfortunately, I haven't seen anyone else ask. And this should have, in my mind, been the number one question. Like, I can see very legitimate criticism of why we now are in a position where we're suddenly redirecting revenue. And so I think that there's two pieces of criticism which I want to address, and I think both are legitimate. The first is why this was made as an exchequer decision, only later to be ratified by the autocracy rather than the other way around. I'll address that in a moment. But the question that I haven't seen and that's a question that a lot of people have been asking. The question I haven't seen anyone ask is, why wasn't this done earlier? Right? We have now sought to reduce the expenditure to the absolute minimum, which brings our monthly expenditure into the vicinity of $40,000 to $50,000 a month, where previously our monthly expenditure was over $200,000 a month. And before that, it was over $300,000 a month. So why was this decision not taken before? And I'm going to answer that question, even though it hasn't been asked, because I think that is the crucial question. And if there is one piece of criticism which I think can be leveled at the exchequer, it is that this decision was not taken earlier. The reason that decision was not taken earlier is a confluence of several things. First of all, there was a strong desire to be able to keep the team in place because it is a highly skilled team. Not only is it a team of skilled individuals, but it is a team of individuals who understand the system and know how to work together. And we've previously sought to reduce the team to what we felt was a close to minimum. And we didn't want to reduce the team further. Doing so is always a painful thing. And then reconstructing a team that knows how to work together, understand the system, that is an extremely challenging task. Sovryn is a very, very large protocol with a large set of subsystems. And coordinating across that, certainly in a more decentralized fashion where everyone is operating on their own initiative, doesn't have a strict hierarchy like a regular organization would, it's very difficult to put that together. So the minimal team that we had was a minimal team which was designed in order to be able to move aggressively towards growth under the assumption that the market for that would materialize in a way that it has not over the last 5 years. So part one of the answer is that there was a desire not to reduce the team to a point where it would later be difficult to reconstruct if we then needed to expand and felt that the market and the protocol were in an expansionary phase. Part two of that is that there was a huge amount of work that needed to be done, which has been done over the last year and a half. Some of the things are obvious. The work on the sovereign layer, the work on launching and maintaining Bob and the protocol we launched on Bob's chain, and the creation and launch of the launch platform, so Origins 2.0. But the bulk of the work is actually much harder to see. We have spent the last year and a half hardening the system, reducing technical debt to a point where a much more minimal team would be able to manage the protocol as a whole. And it's been a huge amount of work. There's been a massive backlog of potential exploits, bugs, just general technical debt we've needed to deal with. The third reason is political. We have known, right? And nobody wants to be the person to pull the trigger. Nobody wants to be the person to tell team members that they have to go. But more than anything, no one wants to be the person or get into the fight of saying to SME stakers, we're going to be explicitly and effectively arbitrarily reducing the revenue earned by staking, even though staking revenue was very, very high. And you guys can see that over the last month, there has been a huge amount of frustration, anger, and political tumult and turmoil as a result. It's not a decision anyone wants to take. So with the confluence of those three factors, there were good reasons and effectively political reasons why these decisions are not easy to take earlier. That said, you guys saw Armando's presentation. There was a continuous effort to reduce expenditures. Expenditures in the first quarter after the last budget were over $1 million over that quarter, and then were reduced by close to half to $600,000. So there has been a continuous effort to minimize costs. Now, this idea that we would have to deal with significant social, political frictions with any kind of decision of this kind was obvious in advance, and it's in part because decisions of this nature have been necessary in the past, and it has always been an excruciating process for everyone involved. So that brings me to the second question, right? Or the rather first question which I posed, and which a lot of people have been asking, which is, would it not be preferable that a fee-sharing mechanism and more broadly, more of Exchequer's decisions be tied to plutocracy, not as an overall or overarching governance mechanism, but that the specific decisions themselves should be taken by plutocracy having direct control over fee-sharing mechanism and perhaps other components as well. My answer there is no. I think that would be an extremely poor decision because it would make decisions more difficult, more political, less likely to happen. And I think the last month is evidence of that. So the reality of this is, I think, frustrating for everyone involved. For Exchequer, there is the necessity to make decisions which are clearly going to be unpopular, even if they are necessitated by reality. And for everyone else, there is a feeling that there isn't enough direct control by plutocracy. That is a trade-off. It is a trade-off that we can decide to have or not decide to have. But I think that the trade-off, while frustrating, is what is required in order for us to achieve priority number one, which is the safety, security, and longevity of the protocol. So I'll come to the SIP that I am proposing. The purpose of the SIP is to ratify the decision, so that the decision is one which is discussed, one which is ultimately ratified or not by Bitocracy. Despite the claims to the contrary, I don't know, whoever the shadowy they are, do not control Bitocracy. I've spent a lot of time talking to people to ask them to vote in the most recent set of SIPs. And people will make whatever decisions that they want to make. And if this is not ratified, then the Exchequer will revert payments back to the way they were. I think that would be a very, very poor decision. But the purpose of the split here between Exchequer and Bitocracy is to allow Exchequer to operate on a highly detailed level, to operate under circumstances where we're not doxing people by providing them grants, and to operate with a degree of immediacy that Bitocracy is not able to provide. And the purpose of Bitocracy is to ultimately provide the umbrella governance. And so that is the purpose of ratifying it. So you guys can read the SIP. It's not a very complicated SIP. It basically just says we will either move forward with this or not. And the second component of it is establishing that Exchequer will, on an ongoing basis, look to monitor the financial situation with the goal of making this as temporary as possible. Okay, so there are a whole bunch of questions that people are asking. I will look to respond to them, and then if anyone also wants to join the stage, you can, and we can discuss using voice. But if you prefer to write, which most people seem to do, happy to do that. All right, so so I think actually I answered a lot of these questions. Like questions by TM and Bitocrat. I think, why did we not plan for this problem earlier? That was a big part of my response. Why the staking reward contract is not in Bitocracy to begin with? I think I've responded to that. Okay. All right. I'm going to hand this over to you, French, so that you can try and identify the best questions for us to answer.
Okay. Yes. I would like to cover as much as possible from the questions. So whatever was answered and what, go back to it. Unless you guys will write in the comments or raise your hand to speak that you would like further clarification. So Tom is asking, is there any ROI on the between 3.5 and 4 million spent on Sovryn in the past 15 months?
Yes, I responded to that. So there were multiple different systems built out. But the less visible part is that there's been a huge amount of work in both hardening the system and reducing technical debt, and basically placing us in a position where it is possible for a much smaller team to be able to safely operate the system. One of the other things that I'd like to point out, I've seen several people say that the system shouldn't be so expensive to run. It should only cost a few tens of thousands of dollars a year. That is not the reality of Sovryn or of any significant system holding what is close to $40 million in user. The degree of that is not true on so many levels. First of all, the degree of security that needs to be maintained at all times, 24/7 coverage for security, the complexity of a system with multiple subcomponents and maintaining that system as the underlying systems, including the code bases, the blockchain itself, the needs for upgrades, needs to constantly be maintained. Beyond that, even to this day, Rootstock simply does not have the infrastructure that allows a system like Sovryn to operate, not with the nodes, not with the subgraph, none of it. We've had to build out. The entire Rootstock ecosystem has Gnosis Safe because we maintain the Gnosis Safe nodes. That is what allows Exchequer, Sovryn users, and in fact any Rootstock user to be able to have a safe and secure multi-sig system available at all. The ability for us to have nodes which can operate, allowing users to see price changes in the kinds of trades that they would be making, to see price growth. We needed to reconstruct Rootstock's nodes not only to be higher throughput, but to have endpoints which simply do not exist in the vanilla Rootstock nodes, and so are used by multiple other systems. The oracles that we use for Sovryn are used by multiple other projects within the Rootstock ecosystem. The reality is that the technologies that we've built are expensive to maintain and represent the cornerstone not just of Sovryn, but of a large number of projects within the Rootstock ecosystem. Beyond that, we have legacy components as well. So, for example, today, Rootstock has bridge alternatives that can be used, and in fact, in some ways, are preferable to the bridges, the legacy bridges that we maintain on Sovryn. But migrating away from a bridge is an extremely excruciating process. It is one that we've invested time in, so that it will be possible in the future. But we had to maintain them because for the first 5 years of this project, those bridges which currently exist simply were not available on Rootstock. And so there's just a huge list of things that we're maintaining which go far beyond a simple smart contract or an app. Most of the maintenance is around security and around infrastructure and back-end infrastructure that goes far beyond the smart contracts, not to mention the entire front end.
Thank you, Jago. Another question from Tom, and I think from Brianna as well and other community members. It is, are you, Sovryn, the protocol trading treasury funds on OKX?
That's very easy to answer. The answer is no. The Exchequer doesn't trade funds at all. Doesn't engage in any speculative activity whatsoever. The only activity that Exchequer has engaged in on the exchanges is the conversion of funds for the purposes of payments or rebalancing for the purposes of maintaining the treasury and maintaining a sufficient supply of USD denominated treasury to cover at least a quarter and typically 2 or 3 quarters of activity. One of the things that I've seen in the forum are various speculations around the consolidation and transactions that occurred in November and December at the end of the 2025 year. So there were consolidation transactions. There was a conversion of sovereign dollar into primarily other types of stablecoins that they would be more readily available. But this is not trading activity. And not only that, the amount of transactions that have been associated with Exchequer are far in excess of what Exchequer's actual funds were or the actual transactions that were performed by Exchequer. The reality is that what we've managed to do over the course of 2025 is delay the necessity to withdraw funds from the protocol in order so that we could continue to provide liquidity within the protocol and continue to hold sovereign dollars in order to provide sovereign dollar liquidity by arranging for those for outgoing payments to be performed via other funds. Part of the way that we did this is that those funds, we arranged that some of those funds were paid out by BOSS on behalf of Sovryn, and then that needed to be consolidated at the end of 2025. So what we arranged is for us to actually delay consolidation so that we could, for a longer period of time, maintain a higher degree of liquidity within the Sovryn protocol by Exchequer.
Thank you. Rafit asks, can you give me 2 examples on what is in the Sovryn adoption category? Sure. Comms, which includes content creation of texts and graphics, which are, of course, 2 separate team goals. And, of course, community management and technical support, which used to have a very large team here, in-house team, Sovryn, and was mostly replaced by an external provider, began to cut the monthly run rate. Bitocrat as response to Biala revelations, we've answered one, which is the OKX trading. While earlier this was answered. Okay, another comment from Rafit. It's Boston Lit VM. This was actually covered in the previous community call. But Yago, if you'd like to address that, were funds from the Sovryn protocol directed into OS development or in Lit VM in any way?
No.
Thanks. Another question from Tom and from others. Fee sharing smart contract should have been under Bitocracy for years already. This was covered.
I would add something else there. Making this kind of change is making any kind of change. This is part of the reason we had a larger team. So let's talk about the process of making changes to smart contracts and specifically to Bitocracy, which this would count as, right? So this would be a changing not only what Bitocracy controls, but also how Bitocracy is funded and how Bitocracy funds are dispersed, right? So it would be a change requiring changes to Bitocracy itself, and those are handled with extreme caution. So what is the process? The process is speccing this out, reviewing it, looking for all of the ways that it can go wrong. Then the code is developed, it is tested, it is reviewed by multiple different reviewers. This takes much longer than, making a change to a standard app. It is much more risky. Any change is potentially risky, and that risk needs to be handled, managed, and mitigated. And that requires significant resources. So it is to those kinds of things that resources have been allocated. Now, looking to make this change now would require that we do the same thing. We have fewer resources available to do that kind of thing now. And so it would take longer and mean that we would need to sacrifice the ability to do many, many other kinds of things, including launching Sovryn Layer, including the focusing not just on maintenance, but also on growth. So these things are not costless, right? You can have an idea, it would be nice if we add this. There's millions of things. We have a massive, endless backlog of potential improvements. Tweaks, optimization. The vast majority of them will never happen. This is true of any piece of software, but it is especially true of a piece of software which is managed as smart contracts and manages, close to $40 million in user funds. But these things are the difference between sort of being able to imagine something and executing in this environment is resource heavy.
I'd like to take another one from Tom before I go to Bitocrat. Says the SIP is a ratification SIP. Is it in fact a post-mortem SIP with 50% voting power? And previous comment, Tom points out that he thinks that thwe will control over 50% of the voting power in the Bitocracy. So,
was there a question?
Yeah, is it a post-mortem SIP with 50% voting power? Being
I don't know what a post-mortem SIP is. The goal is to ratify the SIP, and as in a ratifying SIP, it will be, I think, should be a proclamation SIP.
Okay. Bitocrat asked, what will you do if the SIP fails? Will you make another SIP to get funds with Bitocracy's permission?
If the SIP fails, then we will look to. So I think if the SIP fails, Exchequer will redirect the funds to sovereign stakers. And then I think we're going to need to have a very serious conversation about how and whether or not it is possible in the near term to maintain the system to the level of security that our users have grown accustomed to. In other words, just to be more explicit here, the reason we're doing this is because this allows us to maintain the security, functioning, and viability of the system into the future, indefinitely. If we do not take these steps, then eventually, and that eventually is not far into the future, we will not have the funds in order to properly maintain and support the project. And so, again, in my view, there is no decision to be made here. This is the requirements that we have that are required by reality.
Bitocrat points out a loan that was taken by allegedly a founding member of the team, an RBTC loan collateralized by Sov. Few million Sov were used as collateral for an RBTC loan. Do you have anything to share about that, Jaro?
No, of course not. What's it got to do with me? Or the conversation that we're having. Like, people who own SOV can do with it whatever they choose.
What happens with Babelfish now that Hyde is fired? Now I want from Bitcoin.
Babelfish is one of the components that we are continuing to maintain. And it's of the many subcomponents, products, and smart contracts that we're maintaining. Babelfish is just one of many, and that goes to why this is an important system. We've taken on ourselves the cost of maintaining and managing Babelfish. Because had we not done that 3 years ago, Babelfish would have closed out.
Bitocrat is asking if we are mingling funds with Boss, and I'm not sure how you got that.
Yeah, the answer is no.
Okay. Tom is asking, and combine it with Stack Weavio questions, that Sovryn is set to run like it's now with funds running it secured. But what about the future? No future expectations for growth. And thwe is asking, what are leadership planning to do over the next 6 months to increase the protocol revenue?
It's not that we don't have expectations of growth. We do have expectations. We have to be realistic. Reality is that crypto, so to speak, has been in an effectively a 5-year bear market across the board. The ability to massively grow in that environment is constrained. We have several levers that we need to focus on. One is increasing the revenue that the protocol earns from the $40 million that it currently manages. There is probably a good opportunity to increase revenue without adversely impacting the user experience or the value of the protocol by some 15 to 20%, maybe a little bit more. And so that's going to be a big focus over the course of April and May. There's launching the Sovryn layer. We will have the first testnet demonstrating that technology via thwe. Probably by the end of this month or the first week of April. And that will allow us to generate a new potential avenue for significant revenue. And then there may be additional things that we can cut costs on. So, for example, there's potential additional infrastructure costs that we could cut as related to the Bob deployment, etc. And so those are the 3 things that we're going to be focusing on, which allows us to potentially, even in an environment in which the market does not grow at all, even potentially shrinks somewhat, to continue to grow and maybe even double revenue, which is where we need to be. At the same time, positioning ourselves for much more substantial growth, which is possible even in this market around Bitcoin DeFi, and certainly in a market which is more expensive.
Okay. Hillary is asking how close to completion is the Sovryn layer, and is the work continuing with limited funds?
I think I just answered that. The work is continuing, and I expect we'll see the first version of a test kit, not a Sovryn layer, but effectively the same platform that we'll be using over the coming 10 days.
Bitcoin is asking why it was delayed, Sovryn layer. And it's also
because everyone is cutting costs right now, which means everyone is moving slow.
Yeah. Bitcoin, you've now asked Armando to answer the question. Which question in particular is that? Do you mean Sovryn team not okay with the Bitocracy controlling the exchequer funds? This was covered. Would you like it to be answered again? Plus, Brianna, you've been typing for it, I think, for the better part of this entire call. Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. I'll move on to you, Brianna. It's a lot to tackle here. Iago, what happened in December, January? I think it refers to, I'm not sure if you're referring to 2024 or 2025 in December.
I think she's referring to 2025. I'd be happy for Armando to answer that question. What's the question? With that question, French?
The question is as follows. Iago, we realize that we're in a situation where we're trying to understand how we got here. You keep dancing around that. Now she's asking what happened in December and January. I assume it's December 25 and January 26.
Well, I'm not entirely sure what the question refers to, but since November of last year, the team has undergone significant headcount reductions over the course of the last 3 months, as well as a reduction in any spend. It doesn't relate directly to the security and maintenance of the system as it currently stands. So that a reduction spend across nearly every line item related to the protocol. We also wrapped up the our bounty program through Immunify. We're outsourcing a lot of the support-related functions in the system. We're optimizing infrastructure to the extent possible. And if there's anything specific, so I'm happy to.
Okay, moving on. Briefly, since we talked about it, please address the foreign post about the 2 million worth of BTC that went to OKEX. I assume OKEX. If it was for payments, please disclose what this payment was for. $2 million in 1 month makes no sense.
Again, that's not OKX. I know that it says on Etherscan that it's an OKX wallet. It's an exchange wallet. It has nothing to do with OKX. Exchequer utilizes centralized exchanges primarily to swap assets for the purpose of making payments, primarily from BTC to USD. I don't think it was an amount of 2 million, but in any event, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that throughout this entire period, Sovryn was managing liquidity for Pulse BTC essentially for the whole rootstock community. And as part of doing this, it took funds from other entities in order to provide that liquidity. So just to give you guys a sense of what that means, when we were running Fast BTC over the course of 2025, in order to maintain the service levels that we provided, there needed to be a total of close to between 80 to 100 BTC in our systems. And a lot of it didn't come from the extracted treasury. Simply because those funds, in order to provide liquidity across the Sovryn platform and Fast BTC, the treasury didn't have enough funds. So some funds came from third parties, and those parties were paid in part through the revenues from Fast BTC. Those payments were not uniform across the year, and sometimes they came out at certain times. And the way the financial reports work is expenses are realized at the time, not at the time that the liability is created, but at the time that the actual liability is paid. And so movement of funds to exchanges can also include movement of funds that don't belong to Exchequer. And since Fast BTC was sunset, those funds had to go back to their to the liquidity providers, the original liquidity providers, in the original asset that it was provided in.
Okay. There's an accusation here. I'll read it verbatim. Self-Piano, I know you prefer that. Yago, you're lying about backlogs and bugs being fixed. We can all see the smart contracts in GitHub. There is no Unity bug bounty program anymore. There's been hardly any work done on Sovryn smart contracts in years. In fact, the larger PR on smart contracts in a long time was the recent free sharing collector code that Ron Cosset wrote last month. We can see the repositories. please have Tyrone take the floor and explain exactly the PR mergers, as we can take a look and see significant.
That's true. We don't make changes to smart contracts as much as possible. To the extent possible, we do not make changes to smart contracts. Now, we have made changes to smart contracts, but the vast majority of issues that we've identified internally and externally have had to do with infra, back-end nodes, but the multi-sigs related to both oracles and bridges. That's where the vast majority of the complexity, the maintenance, and the work lies. And the reality is that a working protocol, right, a working application, is primarily not smart contracts. It's all of the structure built around a smart contract. In fact, I would just go a step further, because I think this needs to be made completely clear. If it was just smart contracts, then there would be no need for any maintenance or any team whatsoever. We could just let the smart contracts be run, but then nobody will have access to the smart contract in a way, in the ways that people are used to having access to the smart contracts today. Right? Wallets would not properly connect. There would be no UI. There would be no data. There would be no ability to see historic transactions. What makes the application an application that people want to and can use is all of the harnesses, structure that has been built around them. And that is where the complexity lies.
Please share what Bitcoin OS was letting aliens go. Is this more evidence of using Sovryn Treasury to find Bitcoin OS? I would say it's the other way around. Bitcoin OS was funding aliens, taking care of the sovereign community. Guys. Okay, between some comments, we'll go to another question. Brianna asked, in my forum post, I explained, why is it important to address the Soviet collateral loan? Some is liquid at this point. Sovereign has a responsibility to RBTC lenders to protect them from RBTC being lost to liquid collateral loans. This is standard exchange risk management. But do you have any comment there?
Yes, I don't think that SOP is illiquid. There's constant trading on SOP. But if people believe that the collateral requirements should be increased for SOP or other changes should be made, then there is a way of doing it. And that is a perfect example of what kind of analysis that we can be doing, and it would be great to see SOP introduced.
Okay, Randall, Brianna, so in continuation to the Bitcoin to OKEX, this is 22 BTC and 100K, of which was converted to DLR in December. Please respond to the forum post.
The exchequer held at peak approximately $450,000 of DMNR, which were redeemed. So I'm not sure what the 800K came from. And regarding the rest of the question, I already answered. Those funds were transferred to centralized exchanges from exchequer, and not all of those funds belong to exchequer.
Brianna says that we know it's not a smart contract. Earlier in the call, this is exactly what you claimed was the reasons for such high development costs.
I don't think I did it.
I don't think so either. The video I've answered this Alaska will cover this. Well, please go back and call if you haven't heard it. We are past the hour mark. Guys, as you're typing, we'll take this last question. In the meantime, Bitcoin is asking why we redeem the cast users. Why not?
Why was Sovryn dollar only has one method? There's only one mechanism. Well, effectively, there may be two ways you could think of it. Either via Babelfish or via the Zero protocol. Those are the only two options. There is. I honestly, I mean, because when you convert sovereign dollars into BTC, then you're utilizing the redemption mechanism.
So why don't you not use Babelfish? I was asking.
I wasn't involved in this. Armando, perhaps you're able to respond to this?
I don't recall the exact reasoning. It may have been related to liquidity in Babelfish. I can look back and see what the decision rationale was.
Okay. Bitcoin is asking, we promote the Zero in Twitter, and then we redeem guest user funds. You agree that this is bad? Zero is the main driver of protocol revenue since launch. And the reason we are promoting it on Twitter is that now we, despite promotion, are not seeing almost any new loans, certainly no significant loans being opened on Zero. And the reason for that is that Zero is used mainly as a tool for leverage. So there is a direct correlation between BTC rally periods and the use of Zero. I would expect to see new loans being opened once Bitcoin begins to rally again. Tom is asking, why foreign post concerns directed to the team isn't answered at all? We'll continue this for 5 more minutes.
What difference does it make? First of all, we do respond to foreign posts, but there's been a huge amount of foreign posts. Like, for example, right now, forget about the foreign posts. Even more messages that Brianna is writing. Sorry, I had a problem with my computer. Armando says it was $450,000. Brianna says it was $800,000. Okay. So, there's the reality is I've been through this before many, many times. There's a pattern where all kinds of claims of all sorts are made. Initially, I attempted to respond to all these claims. There is a endless supply of these claims that once we respond, our responses are dismissed. So the reality is that I'm responding less because I'm less motivated to respond. I'm doing what I feel is required in order to maintain the safety, security, and longevity of the project. I'm not, I haven't left the project. I've been engaged with the project now for 6 years. I've continued to invest my time, as have everyone else, in achieving the best possible result for Sovryn, for Sovryn stakers, and under very trying circumstances. And so the reality is, responding and spending my time on these responses is, I just know from personal experience, does not yield a good positive ROI on the time. And so it's just simply that. I'm not attempting here to, and there's no way that I'm going to make people feel happy about all of the decisions. And I'm not even trying to do that. What I'm trying to do is do what I believe is best for the protocol and by extension for everyone, including myself and all of the SOV stakers, today and into the future. So that is what I'm committed to doing.
Okay. thwe is asking, how is rendering Sobi liquid with your own so-called malicious lending behavior, looking after the safety and the security of the protocol?
Yeah, so this is a perfect example of the kind of, why do I not respond to everything? Because some things just, it's not going to, either it doesn't make sense to respond to them, or even if and there's no, this is just like a baseless accusation. Some things are better thought out, some less. But the reality is that I think we have, over the course of this call, responded to practically everything. And now we're getting into sort of what effectively degrades into a he said, she said, and in some cases conspiratorial thinking. And so, the bottom line is, the decision that we have to make is, are we going to fund the maintenance that is required for the system? It's all of this rest of this stuff is sort of noise.
Bitcoin is asking, will we have community calls, development updates? Well, once the thwe layer has launched and we took some learnings from it, we'll do a community call to discuss these learnings around the Sovryn layer itself. Would there be a thwe call or update? I'm basically referring to that. Killer is saying that without a complete breakdown of expenses, it's hard for the Sovryn community to trust, and says transparency is key.
Let me ask a simple question. Okay, we know what the expenditures were leading in 2003 and 2004 and 2005. We know what the team was in 2003, 2004, 2005. Armando presented a budget showing what the monthly expenditures were, what quarterly expenditures were, what annual expenditures were, and in previous budget reports, he's provided the same thing. People are asking, where did the funds go? That's where the funds went, right? The funds have gone to primarily maintain the team, and then the whole host of associated activities around managing the infra, which was tens of thousands of dollars a month, various adoption initiatives, provision of liquidity, security audits, and paying bug bounties. This is where funds have gone to now. Over the last few months, we have taken drastic steps to substantially reduce expenses across the board. And so the outgoing expenses are now reduced. We're paying a price for that. In the fact that we've stopped the unified bug bounty, we've reduced the team. There's no 24/7 hour support and community support anymore. The technical team, the dev team has been reduced, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, where did the funds go? That's where the funds went. We've answered this multiple times, not just in the documentation provided, but also over the course of this call. And so when people come back and keep saying, all right, but you haven't answered the questions, I think that either that is in bad faith or there's just a lack of understanding here. In any event, there's no deep mystery here, right? We've provided the budget. A year and a half ago, well, more actually, close to 2 years ago, we presented a budget saying we had 16 months left. The budget we presented was the budget that we all moved forward with. Nothing here is surprising.
Thank you, Iago, and thank you to the community for attending the school. The rest of the questions are basically repetition of what was previously asked. Iago and Armando will read the hearing and refine if they think it will be productive. Thank you, everybody, for attending the school. I'm closing it down.
Thank you, everyone.